Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. We are group 4 and today we are going to present about tragedy and comedy in drama. But before we start the presentation, let me introduce you members of group 4. Me, Puji Lestari as first speaker, then the second speaker is Haidar Farros, and third speaker is Angrum Bunga Listy. Fourth speaker is Listy Angela NS, and the last speaker is Helfi Diani Rosa. Okay everyone, let's we go to the explanation. I'm sure that some of you already know that tragedy and comedy in drama, but still I'm going to tell you the terms of tragedy and comedy. The word tragic, for instance, means a certain kind of literary art, and not as it does in the newspapers and television, any kind of disaster. Snooker players failing to pot the black, as well as serious incidents, are called tragic by journalists and commentators. So, based on this explanation, the term tragic in drama is really different with the term tragic in news, because terms in drama is more literary art, so it relates with fictional world. Move from the terms, next is tragedy, chaos, and deeds in drama. There are two aspects of tragedy that are chaos and deeds. Chaos, also be called disorder, is both personal and communal. For simply, chaos is a worse situation which makes the central character gush into pieces. So chaos hits hard the central character. Meanwhile, chaos usually meanwhile deeds is usually chaos ends indeed, the great shadow that hangs over all tragedy. So deed is destiny that usually comes from chaos. For example, the deeds of Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare. As our life, deed is like the end of the story. Next is tragic heroes and heroines. Tragedies usually center on one character, a man of exceptional qualities in a high position. The central character is called the hero. The title indicates the character's importance. A hero is larger than life, almost godlike, and is at the center of myths and legends. The word hero is probably seems like male character, but it's not impossible that hero can be a female character. For example, Lady Macbeth in Macbeth by Shakespeare. Besides that, the character can occupy a low position in society. That are tragedies centered around ordinary characters. They are often called domestic tragedies, but there are very few. The next is the fall of the hero. The fall of the hero is the main action of tragedy. This fall is both external and internal. Externally, the hero falls from power and respect, and internally from peace of mind. For example, in Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, Romeo was dead cause he looks Juliet dies in front of him, and he felt fear of her, so it means the fall of the hero both external and internally.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Haidar. The next is the sense of inevitability. The fall of a hero is often inevitable. Inevitable is related to the idea that tragedy recognizes moral or religious unfairness. If there are no values, there can be no. Here, the inevitability of tragedy rises two closely related problems. The first, extent to which the characters are free or controlled, and the second, whether the outcome of the event could have been avoided at all. The tension between freedom and control is continually there in tragedy, and could the outcome have been avoided? Uh, the question of whether or not the outcome of event is inevitable is related to the idea that tragedy recognizes moral or religious imperations. Okay, okay. For the next material is suffering. In tragedy, there is suffering as well as death. Suffering can be both physical and mental. For example, in King Lear, Clothar suffered when his eyes flooded out and when he told. Uh, Suffering can be both physical and mental. Some people point out that through the suffering of heroes, if excessive, it does lead greater self-knowledge. His suffering is appalling, and nothing can be said to lighten its terrible weight. And for the next material is the sin of waste. Because tragedy shows the fall, excessive suffering and death of a great man, audience are likely to experience a sense of waste. A great man has come to nothing. At the end of play, therefore, there must be a feeling that a great human being has passed away. There is something massive and universal about tragedy. Tragic action involves individual, nation, and even real of the nature. And the vastness of tragedy is moral and religious as well as physical. In tragedies, audience see the central issues of human life explored, and the fear that tragedy arouses is not the of being frightened or shocked, but the feeling of being in the presence of the force that strange and terrible. Okay, thank you very much. That's for me. For the next, Angrum, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Angrum Listy. I will explain about first tragedy, ambiguity and ambivalence, second about Shakespeare and the theatricality of tragedy, third about the involvement of the audience, and last about how the audience respond to the end of tragedies. First, here we go to the first explanation about tragedy, ambiguity and ambivalence. Ambiguity and ambivalence are words often used when talking about literature because these words have come to have a number of meanings. First, ambiguity. Tragic ambiguity is present in the moral status of characters, and tragedy requires an audience to make a moral judgment. Feeling like a fear-laden and even horror in the presence of tragedy depends upon the audience knowing what is right and what is wrong. Second, about the ambivalence. Each short step from this consider the reactions of the audience. It's been the expression of countless theater goers that seeing tragedy is never a simple experience. For example, audiences are both attracted and repelled by the actions of the tragic protagonist, as example in
Macbeth, he is a brave and loving man. At the time, he talks with his wife like a Romeo, but he kills an old man in his bed. Next, I will explain about Shakespeare and the theatricality of tragedy. Shakespeare's tragic figures are ambiguous in another way in the attitude they take and warn us to take to what they have done. Shakespeare's show in this character is something very close to love of display. It is if they know they are on the stage and they revel in their tragic dilemma in such a way to call the audience attention to it. Two words are associated with this tragic ambiguity is hubris and bravado. Hubris has already been used the pride, the overweening pride of tragic figures is seen in the way regard their own faults as a spectacle that all should watch. Hubris, as implied earlier, is always an ambiguous quality. Second is bravado. Bravado means the swaggering and ostentatious display of courage. It is always a noisy and public way of calling attention to one's own qualities. Next, in 14.10, the involvement of the audience. One of the distinctive things about tragedy is that the audience is invited to understand what the hero is undergoing. The audience not do an external observer, but they also know what a hero is feeling. For example, in Othello, the pity and the sense of powerlessness are so great, so the audience have been known to shout in frustrated desperation at the dominant and misguided hero. And in Richard II, in the early part of the play, he is framed proud and foolish, but when he falls from power, the audience share his grief and pities the lonely figure in the prison cell who tries to imagine that his prison is like world over which once ruled. Next, in 14.11, how the audience responds to the end of tragedies. Although tragedy brings suffering and ends with death, it is the experience of the audience that is moving but not depressing. Nobody has satisfactorily explained why this is so, but three important ideas have been advanced. First, the idea of catharsis. Second, the idea of seriousness. And third is the idea of human dignity. Catharsis is an idea that goes back to the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Second, seriousness. Tragedy reminds the audience the life is serious. At the end of play, the audience must feel that they have been reminded of depth of life, of the fact of things matters. It could be they have been reminded that life is fast and wonderful, or that human relationships are both wonderful and very difficult. And last is human dignity. Tragedy reminds an audience that people can be dignified and noble. It is not always easy to believe or remember this is in everyday life. Wars and starvation suggest that human life is cheap and many industrialized societies people feel small and anonymous, but in tragedy we see heroism, nobility, courage, patience, and love. We see this thing, in spite of flaw, willful appeal, and appalling suffering, it is said of Othello that he is great of heart. The same can be said most tragic characters and human beings in general. Thank you very much. That is from me, and the next material will be delivered by Listy. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Hopefully everybody is healthy and happy today. My name is Listy Angela NS. So as you know, today I'm going to explain about three parts. There are three parts that I will explain in drama. The first is 14.12 comics plots and convention. Second is 14.13 how comedies begin, and the last is 14.14 comic device. Okay, so as you can see on the screen on these PPTs, comic plots and convention. The plots in tragedies are simple and the plot in comedy is primary. Okay, so the plots of tragedies are often simple. The fall of the centrals figure must be the ship experience, so playwrights rarely complicate the plot by including other elements. In comedy, however, plot is primary. What delights and intrigues audiences is the complex interweaving of a number of characters with a different set of often contrary ambition. The audience will certainly anticipate that all will end well, but they are frequently both perplexed and fascinated to see how the playwright will achieve this. More than any other kind of drama, comedy is dependent upon its convention. Convention, agreements between audience and a playwright that certain pieces of action will have a particular significance and will summon up a particular response, are the shape way in which an audience can enjoy the welter of events and still know what to make of what is going on. This is even the case when conventions are subverted. Now, we are moved to the next, that is convention are of different types. The first is convention of subject matters. Okay, as well as we shall see, one of the central topics of comedy is love. Here there are many conventions. For example, characters falling in love at the first sight, their parents object, there is misunderstanding between the lovers, they run away, their love has to be tested, and marriage is regarded as a reward. Next is convention associated with the way in which characters go about seeking for happiness. Disguise is a good example. Virtually everything that happens when characters are disguised is controlled by a highly developed set of convention. Okay, the last is convention about characters. Twins are popular in comedies. Just think of the confusion that they can bring, and so are lovers, clever servants, and characters who have no self-knowledge. So now let's move to the next slide. There are two important points to make about comic plots and convention. First is they are traditional. Comedy is above all a traditional art. And the second or the last, because plots and convention are so central to comedy, they are virtually coterminous with its theme. Tragedy is often about the big issues in life, whereas comedy is usually about its own processes. This can be easily seen in the sort of questions that are said about comedy. Very frequently, examiners ask students to write about the importance of disguise and deception in 12 Nights, or As You Like It, or Much Ado About Nothing. This can be said to be the themes of those plays, but equally importantly, they are also their convention. When talking or writing about comedies, you will often find that the words you use to talk about the themes and the words you use to talk about the convention of the plot are the same. Next slide. How comedies begin. Okay. There are conventions in Shakespeare and other comic writers about the opening of plots. Shakespeare regularly deploys two. The first is the arrival of strangers. The pattern is a difficult situation made more difficult by the arrival of strangers, but one which, because there are new characters, works itself out. The second is the authority of the older generation unjustly exercised against the young, often by means of the revival of an ancient law. This way of opening comedy is often used in plots dealing with love. For instance, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the love of Hermia and Zeus, already in being when the play opens, is threatened when her father claims his right under an ancient law to order his daughter to marry whomsoever he wishes. Okay, so now let's move to the next slide. You can see comic device. Now we talk about comic device. There are two words that Shakespeare uses for the stratagems or resources characters deploy. The first is device and the second is practice. A practice or device is any trick or plan one character or set of characters adopt against another. The aim is always to create an advantage. Okay, so now move to the next. There are three popular devices in Shakespeare. The first is disguise, the second is overhearing, and the last is misinformation. The first, disguise. We have already discussed how disguise works in drama, so little more need to be added. In addition to disguise allowing characters to speak and hear that which they normally would bear from. It gives characters a freedom and raises the issue of identity. For example, Rosalind finds that her disguise allows Orlando to say to her that which he is too bashful to utter, but it also bestows upon her an enjoyable freedom to joke and, when necessary, speak her mind firmly. The second is overhearing. Overhearing. A sure way of gaining an advantage over another character is overhearing what he or she is saying. The way the character who knows it at an advantage because he or she not only knows but knows that the other character doesn't know that he or she knows. Overhearing, it should be noted, is not only found in comedies. In Othello, a play which in its design resembles a comedy, Lago uses it to do Othello. And the last is misinformation. Okay, one of the convention of comedy is that in which a clever rogue deceives a gullible fool, usually by conveying false information. This is called gulling, and the one who does it is the shark, and the victim is the gull. Ben Jonson plays are built around this convention. Okay, thank you so much. That's for me. So my friend will continue explain about the next material. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Helfi Diani Rosa, and I will explain about some materials. The first one is confusion, recognition, and closure. Confusion. Of this, one of the most important is confusion. An audience watching a comedy sees a set of characters who, to a greater or lesser degree, are in doubt as to what is happening to them. This is in a large part due to disparities in knowledge. Some characters know more than others, and usually all characters know less than the audience. Recognition. Like other plots, there is usually a moment of recognition when characters see what has been happening to them. These moments come towards the end of a play, though not necessarily at its very close. The essential point about comic recognitions is that they come about when characters acquire knowledge. Comic plots are set in motion by characters who deliberately create disparities in knowledge, and they draw to a close when those disparities are eliminated. Closure. Yet it will be a mistake to assume that the atmosphere at the close of a comedy is a dry one, chock full of reasons. The note on which many comedies close is that of wonders and amazement.
The feelings of wonder and amazement are close to happiness, and happiness is the note on which comedies end. Tragedy moves towards death, and comedy towards a renewed happiness. Happy endings, particularly in Shakespeare, are often created by two events. The first is the finding of the lost, and the second is marriage. The stage filled with characters. What usually happens at the end of the comedy is that the stage is filled with all the characters. The fact that the stage is full gives expression to the idea that characters are given their place in society and that with marriage society is being renewed. One of the patterns of comedy is that a character is isolated from society and subjected to an ordeal or test. The happy ending of a comedy is the readmission of that character. So please remember, the most important things about a comic plot is that it ends happily. The audience. Finally, a word must be said about the feelings of the audience. Unlike tragedy, the audience doesn't usually get deeply involved in the inner lives of comic characters. The audience always retains a slightly distant view of all the elements of the play. They are delighted and filled with wonder, and they are also aware of how the complex plot has been worked out. The second explanation is about comic characters. There are two very important aspects of comic characters. The first is the centrality of women. Comedy, particularly Shakespearean comedy, is dominated by women. Men are tongue-tied or over-romantic, but the girls are witty, sensible, and enterprising. Rosalind is a splendid example. When she is turned out of her uncle's court, she disguises herself as a man, and with her cousin, another enterprising girl called Celia, she goes off into the forest of Arden. When she finds the man she loves, she proposes to him that she will pretend to be Rosalind so he can woo her to gain confidence. At the end, she organizes the marriages. And the second one is the importance of stock characters. The other reason why there are more stock characters in comedy than tragedy is that in comedy, the action is very important. Many of the things that entertain in comedy do so because of what is done rather than who is doing it. The stuff of comedy is mistaken identity, deception, and disguise, and those things are amusing in themselves. The third explanation is about love. If the central action of tragedy is the fall of the hero, the central action of comedy is falling in love. Because love is very important, several aspects of it need to be explored are love sadness, how characters speak about love, and how love is planned. The first is love sadness. In comedies, falling in love is often sudden and surprising. For example, love at the first sight. How characters speak about love. Because love is sudden, it is spoken about in dramatic ways. Love is said to be a madness, a plague, and a game. Love is said to be a madness, for example, when Malvolio is deceived into believing that Olivia loves him, he transforms himself. The letter that has deceived him has spoken of yellow stockings and cross-gartering. This he willingly wears when he comes to woo her. The scene is both very funny and painfully embarrassing. He is in love with her, but she is only thinking of Cesario. Her attendants say that Malvolio has gone mad, to which she says, "I'm as mad as he, if sad and merry madness equal be." Love can be as sudden and devastating as the plague. So, love is also compared to disease. In the section on tragedy, much stress was laid upon the mysteriousness of tragic action. The likeness between love and disease point to a similar mysteriousness in love. Love strikes suddenly and for no reason, as does the plague. And the last is, love is compared to games, because the image of games is deeply appropriate. Love is playful, enjoyable, and above all, not like ordinary life. And then how love is planned. Comedy shows that characters can be brought to love each other by trickery. The tricks that are used most are disguise and deception. There is something comical about being in love. When Cupid's arrows strike, even the most staid and calm person can become wild, unpredictable, and unstable. Watching people in love can be very entertaining. This is why love has always been one of the major subjects of comedy. And the last explanation is about laughter. There are three ideas of what makes people laugh. The first is expectation. Expectation can be funny both when it's fulfilled and when it's denied. Two common reactions to expectation are "I could see it coming" and "I never expected that." And then the second is characters behaving like machines. An audience also laughs when it sees characters being beaten or humiliated. The reason for this is that it sees characters' bodies simply as bodies. The more the human body approximates to a machine, that is, to something lacking personality, the funnier the actions become. It is possible to see bodies as machines because of the detachment of the audience. And the third is a sense of proportions. What usually saves comedy from being farce is a strong sense of proportion. Because we have a sense of proportions, we have an idea of how characters should and do behave. When that sense of proportions is not reflected in behavior, we laugh. From this, you can see that what counts as funny often depends upon the manners of society. Well, those are the materials for tragedy and comedy. We apologize if there are many mistakes in our presentation. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.